Welcome to another edition of the Rouge Radio Podcast, episode 454, and I am lost. This is powered by the Canadian Football Podcast Network, and if you're watching live on YouTube, live on Twitter, or the live stream, I'm like without direction. I've like my hair is all messed up. I'm like constantly looking at the camera right now. And I have no idea what I'm looking at right now. It's like different. Usually I'm wearing a bomber hat. It's just losing all control. My name is Robert Dalton. Again, this is powered by the Canadian Football Podcast Network. Tony Allen is not here. He's taking his sabbatical. He's catching up on some personal matters. So we at the Rouge Radio, all one of us are wishing him, I shouldn't say speedy recovery. Yeah, but I mean everything will be all good on the Tony Allen front. So you're just going to be listening to me for about a half hour, and here's where I miss Tony, because I miss Tony because of the fact is that I don't know if you heard the music that just played. I honestly have no idea if you did. The fact is that I get Tony to pre-hear, and if he can hear it, then we're all good. So I'm going to go through this live streaming, and I have no idea if you're catching all of it. And if it doesn't, well, then it's going to be heavy on the editing, the post-editing for the audio portion of this podcast. Some great, I guess, week 18, or again, week 18 action in the CFL. Pretty decent. Started off with Hamilton. This game went all the way down to the final minutes. This is the CFL 2022 season has just been, in a nutshell, if you could describe it, has been nail biting, because all games, you would think like a team like Ottawa, who just won their fourth game in a row. Okay, you would think that all their games would have been blown up, but no, their games outside of a couple have actually gone down to the final minute. You definitely appreciate that in 2022. We've got Saskatchewan losing God knows how long or how many they've lost in a row. They're 6-10. The host team is on the verge of missing the playoffs. I don't know. Obviously, that they wouldn't be the first team to miss the playoffs, definitely. But they would probably be one of the first teams that have actually had Grey Cup aspirations. And some pundits would have predicted that they would have been at least in the Final Four. And then now they're in danger of not even showing up at all. That's amazing. The Toronto Argonauts helped out the Winnipeg Blue Bombers by defeating the BC Lions 23-20. With that win, a Winnipeg Blue Bomber win would have clinched first. And of course, we saw what Winnipeg did over Edmonton with the 48-11 victory, leaving no doubt that Winnipeg is a clear-cut favorite to win the Grey Cup this year, to be three-peat, at least to show up in the big dance in Regina on November 20th. And of course, the last game of the week was the Ottawa Redblacks surprising the Montreal Alouettes 24-18, a game that had its moments. It had its moments. But it also kind of it reeked of a team that had just it reeked of a game that involved two teams, including one that won their fourth game in 18 weeks. You can just see it. It's like neither one of those teams really wanted to win that one. If you're watching streaming live on Twitter, live on YouTube, and you see the little scroll going back underneath, you can tell that this podcast is partnered with Sports Interaction, SIA.com/Rouge. And this will be different because I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on week 19 with everything going through, including some weird starts. I shouldn't say weird, because the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, they clinched West. They clinched first in the West, and you just know that they were going to rest some starters going the rest of the way. 3 weeks left, 2 games left, home and home against the BC Lions, but there's a bye in the middle of that, so they'd get that extra rest. It's almost like last year. Last year they clinched, then they played the Alouettes at home, and then they just kind of coasted the rest of the way, barely eking out a victory over Saskatchewan to get to their 12th Grey Cup victory in Hamilton last year. But enough about the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But I honestly, let's talk about them. Not the 2022 version. The Manitoba government has decided to provide a bonus. It's not even a donation, not a loan. $5.5 million towards the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to help with their bid for the 2024 and 2025 Grey Cup. And I'm just saying, okay, well, ideally, because we all know Hamilton is going to host next year, the 2023. That's already done with. Is there a team? Is there an organization that deserves it more than the Bombers? Like this is just like, I'm not even talking about 2023 right now. Just like right now, the vibe in Winnipeg is insurmountable. Like everywhere you go through Twitter, you go online, you go in the stores, there's Go Bomber signs galore. And then this is a hockey crazed town in Winnipeg. And yes, I am from Winnipeg, so you're going to get a little bit of a Winnipeg bias. This is a hockey crazed market, but everywhere you see is nothing but Bombers. Nothing but Bombers. And that's a good thing. Right? That's what you want. You want to see your team, your CFL team, marketed like this. And all I see is, going back to what Amar Doman, the owner of the BC Lions, said, okay, well, I've got sick and tired of seeing NFL jerseys in Vancouver. And now he's done that. It's not a complete fix, but you could see it. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Now in Winnipeg, it's got the NHL season starting this year. I don't know if it's kind of like, hey, I gave up on the Jets because, I'm not really a big fan of who's coaching them, who's playing on the team and whatnot. But it's good to see that, hey, listen, we're going out. We've got a hockey crazed market in Winnipeg. We're in love with the Jets. But we've got this football team that's in the midst of a dynasty. And I thought to myself, oh my God, what if the Bombers beat Hamilton a couple of weeks ago? What if they beat Montreal in week 10? Are we talking about an undefeated season? Again, if and buts or candies and nuts or whatever Dave Ritchie used to say all the time, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. But it's and again, I don't want to say this, hey, this is going to be like a pro Bomber podcast. It's just like right now you've got a back-to-back wins. You've got back-to-back Grey Cups. It looks like it's on a surefire way to a 3-peat. Looks that way. There's a couple teams, and Nathan Rourke. If Nathan Rourke comes back, that puts a damper into anything that Winnipeg has. And of course, there is. You heard me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Very good.
All right. So now that I got my bomber hat, thanks to the wife and kid who should be in bed by now, but so now I look a little bit pretty, and that was the most awkward 5 seconds of podcasting. I wonder what this would have felt like on over the audio portion. Anyway, so let's go back to the topic at hand. Let's say that this does wonders for, because the trickle down effect for the Grey Cup bid goes down like rumored to be like the $80-90 million or something like that, trickling down into the economy, and not only in Winnipeg but in Manitoba. And I think it's like that government, just like everything that we've gone through post-COVID, everybody wants that. Everyone wants that success, and it's just a matter of, okay, well, what And I know a lot of people are going to say, like, oh, Premier Heather Stephenson. Oh, you know what? I'm getting too political here. Let's not talk about, let's not talk politics right now, because now I'm boring the freak out of myself. And I think a lot of people are tuning in right now. I can see that right now. Let's go back. Let's go to Global Rouge 2.0 or whatever Tony wants it. These are the listeners that are tuning in. At least as of last week, you're tuning into the Rouge Radio podcast. We got your Canada, United States, Indonesia, Australia, Germany, 9, Switzerland, United Kingdom, Bermuda, Israel, and Mexico. Top cities, we got Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, St. Albert, Regina, Montreal, Burnaby, Vancouver, Victoria, and Orillia, Ontario. I think someone actually told me where Orillia is. I've completely forgot. Completely forgot. So if you're one of them that said, "Hey, this is where Orillia is," I apologize. And now I'm actually going to Google it. Well, so you're actually going to watch me Google it, because that's what this podcast has actually come down to, is watching me Google things. All right, so that's where. Okay, so based on this, Orillia is by Lake Simcoe. Okay, so I did not know that. And the closest, okay, so it's I would venture to say it's probably about an hour drive north of Toronto. And it's somewhere in between Prairie Sound, Ontario, and Toronto. Not that Prairie Sound. Okay, this is what happens when Tony leaves me alone. Definitely do not like being alone. I definitely should have got someone else. And I think there's a lot of people that are as we read off as I did read off the list of countries and cities that are listening to our podcast. As again, our podcast is sponsored by seedgiant.ca. Enter the promo code Rouge. Get discounts on tickets to sporting events, to tickets in your area. Again, buy local, stay local, and you are supporting a podcast that covers the entire CFL. Even though that the main one of the hosts right now is in front of a camera, as I just noticed, a bomber shirt and a bomber hat. I'm just digging my own grave right now. Also, the podcast is brought to you by the friends and family at manscaped.com. Enter Rouge at manscaped.com for 20% off and free worldwide shipping. Get all the tools with Manscaped. And yes, your balls will thank you. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, wait a minute. What are Dalton's going from politics to his man parts? No. That's actually the tagline for friends at manscaped.com. And again, if you go to the ticker at the bottom, Sports Interaction, your first deposit will be matched 150%. 125. I'll stick with 125 downplay, and if they give you 150, that's great. 125% with your first deposit with our good friends at Sports Interaction. I haven't placed a bet in a while, and I think my wife might actually be happy with that. But some key things to go in before we get into the Week 19 predictions is with the betting lines with Week 18. The one thing is for sure, and that we do know for sure, is the Edmonton Elks are gone. So what is next for Edmonton? Like, we knew that, like, Chris Jones, that's his MO when he takes over as GM, and the blueprint is in Saskatchewan. What's next? They've got their quarterback, Taylor Cornelius. I'll assume that they bring back Kenny Lawler. And I'll just assume that Manny Arsenault is not going to be brought back. So they got their quarterback. Whether or not we all agree that he's good, they got him. They also got a pretty decent offensive line. Not great, not good, but decent. It's an offensive line that's not going to lose you games. And of course, you just you look at Chris Jones and his work in the past. That defense is going to be improved as long as they still stay healthy. I think Edmonton is built pretty decent. I love Dylan Mitchell. Kevin Brown, I think they found a couple pieces that you can build around. Now, if they can improve on that quarterbacking, like Taylor Cornelius is not the Taylor Cornelius that he was last year. That it was just basically, just reminding me a lot of Michael Bishop, who ran and threw the ball 40 or 50 yards. Now he's doing a little bit with some creativity. He's running the ball a little bit more, but that's what's more for. I just always think back to that game against Saskatchewan. We just use his legs, and generally it's almost impossible for one guy to take over the game in the CFL, but he did it that week against Saskatchewan. And I think right now that the, when we're looking at this is just getting text while we're in the middle of talking. This is why you keep the phone away. Okay, so in my opinion, like right now, we're going to, like what's their plan? Like when you look back to what they did in 2017 with Saskatchewan, they had Jerron Carter. They brought him back, or they brought him into the fold. They added Vernon Adams. They got Kevin Glenn. Basically, anything that was in 2016 was gone. And I think that's the blueprint. So if you're asking because of where they are right now, you got to think that maybe Edmonton finishes ahead of Saskatchewan next year. I mean, at this point, they got Calgary being Calgary, Winnipeg being Winnipeg. If Nathan Work's still in BC, Edmonton could very well improve and still only make it to fourth place and hope for a crossover. That's how dangerous that Western Division is. That's seriously. That is completely. It's weird. So enough of that. So we're going to go with that. The Edmonton Elks are gone. The Ottawa Redblacks are still mathematically in. How the freak does that happen? How does that happen? How does the Edmonton how are the Elks just eliminated, but the Redblacks are still mathematically have some chance? They have some life left in them. They've got Montreal again at home, and we'll talk more about that in a couple minutes. They've got a home and home with Hamilton coming up. So theoretically, Saskatchewan is hoping that Hamilton and Ottawa just kind of split that season series there, and then they win one against Calgary. This will be interesting as we get into that. But let's go into Week 19, shall we? Week 19 starts off with the Ottawa Redblacks hosting the Montreal Alouettes. And I know that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to point to, okay, well, Ottawa's at home. They're definitely going to lose. And I think right now, if you look at the history of Bob Dice, when he took over the head coaching duties in Saskatchewan in 2015, his record, including the first game, the rest of the way was 3-6. Now, that was a bigger sample size. He's only got a couple of games to work with just to sort things out for next year. But sometimes when you have these kind of issues, these kind of don't work out based by changing the field general on the sideline. It just doesn't happen. But if you're looking at maybe some positives for Ottawa, you look at the depth chart, the injury report for the Alouettes. Philip Gagnon. Well, I mean, he fully practiced, but he's still injured. Michael Wakefield the same way. Reggie White and Sean Jamieson gone for the year. That's going to hurt Montreal's chances. Now, is Montreal good enough to still withstand what Ottawa has? Could be. William Powell's likely not going to play. Devontae Dedmon's gone for the year. Patrick Level's most likely gone for the year. Jalen Acklin didn't practice. He's likely not going to be there. And same with Dino Boyd. The last time we talked that Dino Boyd was a factor was that game against Saskatchewan. Lorenzo Malden's dealing with some injuries. He's got a shoulder injury, but he did practice this week so far. And of course, this game's on Friday, so we're recording this on Wednesday night. So there is a day for that to change, but Lorenzo Malden looks to be good to go if you're an Ottawa Redblack fan. Now, if you're looking at watching this live and you're watching this, the Montreal Alouettes are 3.5-point favorites. The over-under is set at 47.5 points. And usually, even if you give Ottawa that 3-point home favorite, like we always do, that still gives Montreal a half a point. And so you're looking at, okay, well, is Sean Jameson really that difference maker in Montreal where he's going to be sorely missed? I think there's going to be there needs to be. I mean, it's not the first time that Sean Jameson has actually missed this part of the season. He missed a good chunk of the season when he went down earlier in the season. So, and then the name of the backup escapes me. But there is that chemistry that Trevor Harris has with the backup center when it comes to taking those shotgun snaps, to taking those under the center snaps, if you want a quarterback sneak. So there is that history there. So I don't think they'll really notice that. Reggie White is a big deal, but you still got Jake Weineke, you still got Geno Lewis, and you still got Tyson Philpott. So they do have the weapons, and they still have William Stanback. I think that in itself should offset any kind of injury problems that Montreal has. Montreal on the road, Ottawa at home. Easy money right now is to take Montreal plus the 3.5 points. And I would be very comfortable to take the under. I don't think these two offenses are going to mesh well, especially on the road with Montreal. I know they played earlier I think it might have been in Ottawa. I could be mistaken. I'd have to actually go when they went when they had that. I guess they each were scoring the 40 points. I think Jeremiah Mazzoli was still playing at that time. But at this point, cold weather games, depending on the running game a little bit more. I like Montreal with this one, but maintaining the under. Definitely Montreal plus the 3.5 points. Next game. The Calgary Stampeders host the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and the Calgary Stampeders are favored by 7.5 points with 49.5 points is the over-under. And here's some tidbits. Did you know that the last time that the Hamilton Tiger Cats won in Calgary was 2004? But I thought, and I'm assuming that was a meaningful game, because the East and West didn't play that much. They usually stack those kind of games at the beginning of the season, or somewhere after a bye. But I thought the Bombers had a bad luck. Like, you look back and the Bombers had the one game in 2002, and they had a couple of wins, but they were when Calgary had already clinched first, like 5 weeks prior, and then all of a sudden, just now, I did not know. And this is actually. It's not that bad if you're considering like from a Hamilton perspective, because at least with Winnipeg, you at least had a couple of visits to Calgary a year. And then 2016, they went to 2018, 2016, I believe, 2015. And of course, their time when they were in the West back in the early 2000s too as well. But with Hamilton, it's one visit per year. But it's still amazing. But when you look at it that way, it's not as bad. So here are the people that look like to be out for this week's game for the Calgary Stampeders. Josh Coker, Malik Henry, fresh off a new extension. He looks to be out. Did not practice at all, as he's got an ankle injury. And sometimes I actually have to make sure that this is up to date, because I don't remember Malik Henry suffering an injury. But again, Titus Wall is still listed as questionable. Nick Stats is still out. Colton Hunchak is questionable. But the Hamilton Tiger Cats, Dylan Wynn gone for the season. Micah Johnson is questionable. Jordan Hoover, who is just recently signed, is questionable. Might not even make it, but he is dealing with a hamstring injury. I'm going to go out on the limb and say maybe Hamilton wins. But I think that Hamilton at least covers the spread. I think that 7.5 points at home, when you're missing a big weapon like Malik Henry is to Jake Mayer, I like Hamilton against a run to the point where even if you do get Kadeem Carey going, and I expect that he'll get about 20 touches a game and get close to that 100-yard mark. But at this point, I like Hamilton's run defense. Now, the absence of Dylan Wynn kind of says, okay, well, maybe not, maybe pump on the brakes a little bit. But there's just something about this game that says Hamilton covers. They might win. Flat out, I'd still take Calgary the win. They're well organized, and it's against the East. But I am going to say Hamilton covers. And again, because of without Malik Henry, that offense might dry up. And I can't imagine Dane Evans putting together an offense that runs down Calgary's defense. So Calgary wins, Hamilton covers, and I'll take the under of 49.5. Next game is the Toronto Argonauts go into Edmonton. Again, it's just similar to what the Ottawa Redblacks have been dealing with. The Edmonton Elks have not won at home, and they have nothing to play for. This is pure pride at this point. By the way, can you imagine? You ever watch a movie and you know what's going to happen? You know what the climax is. You just they're building to it, and when it happens, it's just like cheer. When Edmonton gets their first win at home, there is going to be a party of epic proportions. I guarantee it. Right now, as far as the game goes, as far as the injury report, so right now, Toronto's favored by 6 points. The over-under set at 50. Because one team just probably can't have a consistent offense and one team is playing for pride, I find it very hard to take the over. I'm going to say the under in this game too as well. It's going to be heavily on the run game. Toronto's going to have to get that run game going, because if they can't, it's going to be similar to last year where it's going to be one and done in the postseason. Deshaun Amos is back practicing. Dejon Allen, Brandon Banks not practicing. Same with Boris Beatty, but I imagine those are going to be game time decisions for the Edmonton Elks. Toby Antigua suffered an injury against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers as well. Kenny Lawler, again, gone for the season. Jamin Pelly, possibly gone for the season, as well as Trey Watson, who is kind of nursing a knee injury. However, he might be questionable. Nothing is set in stone. But so if you are asking me for a flat out prediction, I have to say Toronto. But because I am just not sold on Toronto's offense, because I'm picking the under, there's not that much separation that's going to happen in between these two teams. So I'm definitely going to have to take Edmonton to cover the spread, but I'm also going to take Toronto to flat out win. So if you are that heavy gambler, put a couple bucks on the spread with that in mind. Last game of the week, and this game, man, if you're a BC Lions fan, I don't know how you can just have a lot of fun with this one, because the Bombers are going to be dressing a lot of their backups. Drew Brown is going to be starting this game, and I imagine there's going to be some backups playing in this game as well on the defensive side too as well. And the biggest news, Nathan Rourke is back practicing after that Lisfranc injury as well. Now, he's still a couple of weeks away even before. Now, he's throwing. I don't even know if he's allowed to practice, but granted, seeing Nathan Rourke throw a football in October, beautiful. Love it. The game status for these two teams, because the game starts on Saturday, is still not exactly up to speed, but the following players who have not practiced with the BC Lions: Jalen Edwards-Cooper, Tynell Cooper, Adrian Green, David Mackey, Shai Ross, and Nathan Rourke were limited. Lucky Whitehead likely may not play, but at this point, it may not even be worth it. From the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, Stanley Bryant, Jamarcus Hardrick, Drew Wolotarski, Jackson Jeffcoat, Theodric Hansen, Nick Taylor, Noah Hallett, Malcolm Thompson, and Dietrich Nichols. Now, a lot of those, Dietrich Nichols is a personal matter, but all those guys are not going to be playing. Now, there is some injury concern, but Stanley Bryant had it was a maintenance day today. But take this for what we will. These players that I just listed will not be playing, because they're obviously they're injured. But at the same time, they don't need them. They clinched. They clinched. They don't need them. So with that being said, so the law of averages says right now the BC Lions are favored by 1.5 points. And who's setting these odds? Because like the Bombers were favored by 2.5 points, and that was like we knew full well that Winnipeg was going to be resting their starters. The moment they won that game, they clinched. We knew that was going to happen. We knew that BC had something to play for. They still have home playoff aspirations, as do the Calgary Stampeders. But this one seems to be a little bit easier for BC. The moment Drew Brown was announced as starter against BC, that betting line went from 2.5 to 1.5 for BC. Like that was a 3.5 point. No, my math is bad. That's like a 4-point swing. Vernon Adams may not be the guy that could throw for 300 yards permanently or consistently, but I think it's what Winnipeg can't do in this game or won't be able to do in this game. It's going to be the difference right now. And this is similar to what had happened last year in with Winnipeg when they rolled into Montreal and then they just got shellacked. They kind of had the game in hand against Calgary and they let that slip away before rolling off 2 straight victories to a second straight Grey Cup. But but with that in mind, I don't think BC should be losing this game. Even without Lucky Whitehead, you've got Dominic Rhymes, you've got Javon Katoy, you've got Josh Pearson, you've got Vernon Adams, excuse me, with a little bit of James Butler in the running game. And BC's defense, excuse me, BC's defense, and I've said it on previous episodes, BC's defense kind of gets exposed a little when they're not playing, when they're not up by 20. That's the difference. That's what Nathan Rourke does for you. Like he's so good, he affects your defensive play on your own team. Like I'm going to give credit to defense and what they're doing in BC, but it is a little bit different when you're playing up by 20 than you are trying to force that key stop when you're down by 10, when you're down by 5. And we saw what BC went week 5 with Winnipeg. They were up by 21-0. BC didn't have an answer for it. Even when Rourke got those 3 touchdowns in the second quarter, in the early third, it wasn't good enough because the BC's defense could not make that key stop, and they got exposed. Now I'm saying this because it's got to be in the back of your mind, but this has no bearings on this game. I think BC covers the spread, and I think BC enough. I think maybe there's going to be enough offensive output where they take the over. I would definitely take the over. There's no cold weather affecting this game. The roof hopefully will be closed at this point. But I think that this should be the game of the week, even though that there's nothing to play for by both teams. But I think you should see maybe a little bit of a vanilla playbook from the Bombers. But with BC, they Winnipeg knows they have nothing to prove, but this is a statement game for BC. This would be a statement game for the BC Lions. So BC covers the spread. They take the points. They win straight out and take the over. Take the over. That'll do it for another episode of the Rouge Radio podcast. By the way, we counted down to episode 450. We counted down to our live streaming. We counted down to everything. This backdrop that you're looking at is not going to be anymore because we're moving into a new studio in a couple of weeks. So I'm going to have a smaller room, and it's going to be epic. Love it. For those of you that like to contact us on Twitter, you can follow our podcast at Rouge Radio. You can contact myself at Rouge Daltz. You can contact Tony at Tony Rouge, and you can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Rouge Radio. And of course, drop by our website through Sports Interaction, SIA.com/Rouge. And of course, you can subscribe to our video content on YouTube. Don't have the exact link for that one, but if you look up the New Rouge Radio, you'll find all of our podcasts dating back to episode 406 or what have you. Still going to upload that, and we've got some more trade trees. For Tony, I'm Dulce. Thanks for listening, and we will definitely see you next week.